I'm going to read from chapter 10. It took me a long time to realize the danger of fantasy. Maybe I never did while I was alive. Fantasy is a way of touching. When Lola and the doctor looked at each other for the first time, their desire began to inscribe the future. The body turns ideas into things. It is dangerous, very dangerous to fantasize. Thomas's laughing face turning towards me in the yellow light, his eyes fixing on me, and that inward leap, my imagination cloaking him, his body, implicated now in my own disastrous perception. Between the acting of a dreadful thing and the first motion, all the interim is like a phantasma or a hideous dream. Kitty knows about this. She understands the thin passage between desire and action, even if her husband does not. She is what I wished I could be, her gaze so cool. I'll tell you what it is. She looks without imposing her own subjectivity. Her gaze upholds the border between self and other. This is what I have always desired, except I called it control. It is a look I have seen before, standing in front of the Hamlet painting by Edwin Austen Abbey, the look on Gertrude's face, her veiled eyes, the flatness of that gaze, the gaze that doesn't move beyond the eyes, that doesn't penetrate but waits. When I see that painting for the first time, I am startled. I have been searching for that gaze for so long. I want to see as she sees. I cannot see as Kitty sees, not even now. There is something in her I cannot penetrate. I am all liquid, I am dissolving into others, but her subjectivity remains contained, untouchable. In life, I would have liked to have taken her into my arms, felt the warmth of her skin, her beating heart. In death, I cannot touch her. Not like Lola who is always so permeable, so close to the beating heart of life and always in pain. The last evening Lola and I spend together, drinking wine in a little dark bar, I ask her if she remembers being a child. Of course I do, she says. I only cared about dancing. Everything else made me nervous. I was so lonely looking back, except I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know what it was to not be lonely. I'm sorry, I say. I didn't mean to bring up any past sadness. She shrugs. It's not sad, really. It's just who I am. She says this, but she doesn't believe it. A woman with a very full life, I say. A lie? And you, she asks. I remember, I say. I remember it every day. I think about it every day. Such a happy time, my princedom by the sea. A glowing green girlhood. Yes, I was Annabelle. She laughs. Oh dear, she says. A pause. She is thinking of what I must have been like as a child. She imagines me running everywhere with quick, sure steps, yet coldly ambivalent towards other children. This is how she felt I was when she first met me, cold, ambivalent. Yet how beautiful I was then, only 24, like a painting, that fantastic, invisible quality of youth. Age didn't suit me so well. It wasn't all bad, she says. My grandmother used to read to me when I was small, and when I was older she would read me French poetry. I loved the names, Valérie Breton-Prévert. A strange, quiet child, her grandmother whispers. She stands in front of the high bookshelves, running her hands up and down the spines of the books, saying out loud to herself the names of the writers, names like jewels. I want to weep thinking of her like that, but like other bodily functions, that ability also seems to have escaped me. In the bar, I ask her, what about your wedding day? Do you remember that? I don't need her to tell me anymore. She is draped in white silk so thin it feels like a second skin. Once she reaches the altar where Thomas and I stand, she turns and meets the eyes of her grandmother, her only blood relation at the wedding. Our grandmother has tears in her eyes, her proud shoulders bent, shivering slightly. They are not happy tears, but tears of grief. She is thinking of her son, Lola knows, and his wife, and though Lola doesn't know this, she was shocked when she first saw her in her dress, smiling, shocked at how much she resembled her mother on her wedding day. Lola looks back at Thomas, who is smiling, and takes her hands in his. Something inside her goes very still, and she has the sense that she is in two places at once, two different times. Thomas's face seems momentarily replaced by her father's face, much younger, smiling at her, and she is her mother, her feelings no longer her own. This lasts only a second, but she feels afterwards that something inside her has shifted. There are tears on her face now, and she takes one of her hands from Thomas's to wipe her cheeks. They are not happy tears. I was always faithful to you, she says to Thomas as he packs his things into suitcases. This is a lie. She has told it so many times that it has replaced reality. Oh, I didn't know before. Experiencing the memory is like reading a book. It unfolds slowly. Spatially, I am everywhere and nowhere. It is not like watching it on a screen, nor like living it. The confines of my body, whatever is left of it, disappear fully. I cannot explain it, you would not understand. I, whatever remains of the I, am pulled into a space she has not visited for a very long time. A couple of years after the wedding, when Thomas is away, she returns to the flat with a young man, tall, awkward in the doorway. Anselm, she calls him. She likes how the name feels in her mouth. He is the lighting designer for the ballet. On closing nights, he brings her flowers. They sit on the sofa together. She tucks her feet underneath her. I watch you dance every night, he says. I don't watch anyone else. In his look, she sees herself reflected. Her whole body in his eyes. The slowness with which he touches her is thrilling. The little catch in his breath when he lifts her jumper over her head. He places his hands on her shoulders, bending to kiss her neck, hesitant at first, as though he is afraid she will tell him to stop. He takes her waist in his hands, his grip tightening, and looks at her face, his body tensed. She leans forward, kissing him, and he relaxes a little bit, his hands going to her thighs, tilting his upper body over hers so that he lies on top of her. He presses himself against her, and she parts her legs, her skirt hitching up. The press of the zipper on his trousers hurts a little. He raises himself up. She likes the way he looks down at her. She tells him to undress, and he stands to do so. She lies very still, watching him. What a beautiful memory it is. The light in the flat is soft, pale orange. He lifts his hand to remove his spectacles, then touches her so gently. Her head falls back, her lips part. Afterwards, once they have moved to the bed and are lying next to each other, he tells her that when he dreams, it is without sight. There is noise, he says, sensation, sometimes even taste and smell, but never sight. Things are still happening all around him despite this. It is, he imagines, just like being blind in real life. He's never told anyone this before, he says. But why tell me, she asks him. You don't even know me that well. He says quietly that it hadn't seemed important before. He reaches to touch her cheek, her bottom lip. He says, I think it is like I live two lives, one in which I see and one in which I am blind. Bravo, Anselm. Lola, how could you forget about him? She forces herself to. Even the next day she does not let herself remember his hands on her hands on him, the velvety feel of him inside of her. If she could just remember him. But it was his last night of work. He had gotten a new job and he was leaving, which was why he had been so bold that night and why she had let him. He leaves and she forgets, so thoroughly that when she says to Thomas, I was always faithful to you, she thinks that she really means it. I cannot tell which is more of a fiction, her faithfulness or her night with Anselm. Anselm knows about fantasy. He wraps her in it night after night. He thinks of her, aching, his skin hot to the touch. By the time he actually touches her, he understands the inevitability of it. Thank you.